The champagne cork popped with celebration. Just as my world shattered into pieces, I'd spend the next month carefully reassembling into something sharper. I stood in the kitchen doorway of 2847 Maple Ridge Drive, the craftsman-style dream house I'd bought 3 years ago, watching my daughter Emily laugh at something her husband Brad said. What I just overheard from the hallway made my chest tighten with a feeling I hadn't experienced since Dorothy's cancer scare back in 2018. Betrayal has a particular taste, metallic and cold, like biting down on aluminum foil. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Brad's voice carried that confident tone he used when closing sales deals at Next Tech Solutions. His words from 60 seconds earlier still echoed in my mind with perfect, poisonous clarity. Once the old man transfers the deed like we planned, this place is ours free and clear. Then Emily can quit that teaching job and we'll finally live the way we're supposed to, the way I deserve. 3 hours earlier, I'd been driving through Portland's autumn drizzle, maple leaves plastering themselves against my windshield like urgent warnings I should have heeded. Dorothy sat beside me, adjusting the casserole dish on her lap that she'd spent all morning preparing. Thursday dinners at Emily and Brad's place had become our weekly tradition since they'd moved into the Maple Ridge house in October 2022. We'd arrive at 6, share a meal, play with our grandchildren Sophie and Lucas, then drive back to our modest Hillsdale ranch before the evening traffic picked up. The house on Maple Ridge represented everything I'd worked 40 years to provide. Not for myself, I'd already lived my life in comfortable simplicity, but for Emily. My daughter deserved stability, security, a foundation her own children could grow up in without the financial anxiety that had marked my own childhood in rural Washington. When the property came on the market 3 years ago, Dorothy and I had used a substantial portion of our retirement savings to make it happen, $850,000. The seller had been motivated, the location was perfect, and Emily had walked through those rooms with tears streaming down her face, whispering that she'd never imagined living somewhere so beautiful. Brad had been enthusiastic too, though his enthusiasm carried a different flavor. He had immediately started talking about entertaining clients, hosting his Next Tech colleagues, using the finished basement for his fantasy football league gatherings. Emily teaches 2nd grade at Riverside Elementary, pulling in $48,000 a year with summers off to be with the kids. Brad's sales manager position brought in roughly $90,000. Good money, but not Lake Oswego money. Not the kind of income that buys craftsman architecture with original hardwood floors and a kitchen that belonged in a design magazine. I'd kept the deed in my name, not out of mistrust, I told myself at the time, but practicality. Estate planning, tax advantages, the flexibility to help if financial emergencies arose. Dorothy had questioned the decision, suggesting we gift it outright and let the kids build their own equity. I'd convinced her that maintaining ownership made sense until we finalized our entire estate structure. Vincent Chen, my real estate attorney and poker buddy for 20 years, had drawn up a simple arrangement. Emily and Brad lived there payment-free, covering only utilities and basic maintenance. I handled property taxes and insurance. They got the benefit of a home they couldn't otherwise afford, and I retained the security of knowing my investment stayed protected. Brad had signed the occupancy agreement without reading it carefully. I remembered now with grim satisfaction. He'd been too excited about the address, the neighborhood, the impression it would make. Emily had tried to insist they contribute something monthly, her teaching salary creating a fierce independence about not being a burden. I'd refused, telling her that grandparents spoil their grandchildren, and this was my way of spoiling Sophie and Lucas by giving them a stable childhood home. Now I understood that Brad had been playing a longer game than I'd recognized. The occupancy agreement included language about potential transfer of ownership after 5 years, contingent on certain conditions being met, and my approval. It was standard legal protection, the kind of clause Vincent inserted into family property arrangements to maintain flexibility. Brad had apparently interpreted it as a guarantee, a countdown timer until the house became his prize for enduring 5 years of living somewhere my money had purchased. I'd arrived early that Thursday evening, letting myself in through the side door using the key Emily had given me for emergencies. Dorothy was running late, detained by a last-minute phone call from her book club coordinator. The house felt empty when I entered. No sounds of children playing or dinner preparations happening. I'd called out hello, but received no response. Then I'd heard voices drifting down from the upstairs master bedroom, Brad's deep baritone and a woman's laughter that definitely wasn't Emily's. My first thought was innocent. Brad must be on a video call with a colleague. Next Tech Solutions did business across multiple time zones. But something about the intimacy in that female laughter made me move quietly toward the staircase instead of announcing my presence. The hardwood floors I'd admired during the purchase now betrayed every step with small creaks that seemed amplified in the silent house. I'd frozen halfway up the stairs when Brad's words floated down with crystalline clarity. Jessica thinks we should repaint the master bedroom once it's officially ours, something bolder than this boring beige Emily insisted on. The woman's response carried flirtation wrapped in conspiratorial comfort. You'll have to be patient a little longer. 2 more years feels like forever when I'm trying to be discreet at the office. Brad's laughter had made my hands clench the banister. 2 years goes fast. Besides, Emily suspects nothing. She's too busy with her students and the kids to notice I've checked out of this marriage emotionally. Once we have full ownership, I'll file for divorce, split custody, and finally start living authentically. Living authentically. The phrase made me want to break something, preferably Brad's smug face. I'd back down the stairs with the careful silence of someone who'd spent decades walking construction sites in steel-toed boots, learning which surfaces telegraphed your presence. The side door closed behind me with a soft click. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to process what I'd just learned. My son-in-law was having an affair with someone named Jessica. He was planning to divorce Emily once he secured ownership of the house I had bought. He viewed my daughter as an obstacle to his authentic life, whatever that meant. And he'd been counting down the days until my investment became his asset. Dorothy arrived 15 minutes later, her Subaru pulling into the driveway with typical punctuality despite the book club delay. She'd taken one look at my face and knew something had shifted. "Harold, what happened?" I'd told her everything in a quiet rush of words that felt like letting poison out of a wound. Her reaction was immediate and fierce. That manipulative snake. We're confronting him right now. I'd stopped her hand as she reached for her door handle. Not yet. If we confront him without proof, he'll deny everything and put Emily in an impossible position. We need to be smarter than our anger. So we'd walked into that house wearing masks of normalcy that felt like they might crack under pressure. Brad greeted us with his usual sales manager charm, commenting on the weather, asking about Dorothy's book club meeting, pouring wine like we were all still playing Happy Family. Emily emerged from the kitchen with Sophie and Lucas trailing behind her, their 7- and 5-year-old energy filling the space with innocent chaos that made the adult deception feel even more grotesque. Dinner had been torture. I'd pushed food around my plate while Brad dominated conversation with stories about his latest sales victories and plans to upgrade their backyard landscaping. Emily had watched him with the tired affection of someone who'd been married 8 years and was too exhausted from teaching and parenting to notice her husband's attention constantly drifting to his phone. After dinner, Brad had stepped outside to take a call, and I'd seized the opportunity to explore their home office under the guise of needing to check my email. The desk held the usual suburban clutter of bills, school permission slips, and neighborhood association notices, but tucked in the bottom drawer beneath old tax returns, I'd found a folder that changed everything. Real estate valuation reports for 2847 Maple Ridge Drive. Current market estimates putting it at $930,000. Refinancing applications, already filled out with Brad's name listed as primary borrower. Asset division worksheets, showing calculations for a 50-50 split that assumed full ownership. And text message printouts between Brad and Jessica discussing timeline strategies for securing the property before initiating divorce proceedings. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He'd been planning this for at least 6 months. Every family dinner, every grandparent visit, every moment of watching me interact with Sophie and Lucas, Brad had been calculating how to convert my generosity into his profit. The folder went back into the drawer exactly as I'd found it. Evidence had to stay undisturbed until I decided how to use it. I'd returned to the living room, where Dorothy was reading stories to the grandchildren, her voice steady despite knowing what I'd likely discovered. Emily was loading the dishwasher with the focused efficiency of someone performing a task they'd done 10,000 times. Brad was still outside, his phone call stretching toward 30 minutes. That's when I'd positioned myself in the kitchen doorway and heard him through the slightly open window. The champagne cork popping had been Brad opening a bottle to celebrate some work milestone. The words that followed had crystallized my resolve into something cold and strategic. Once the old man transfers the deed like we planned, this place is ours free and clear. Then Emily can quit that teaching job and we'll finally live the way we're supposed to, the way I deserve. The way he deserved. My daughter was an obstacle to his authentic life. My grandchildren were collateral damage in his upgrade strategy. And I was the old man whose generosity had created the very weapon Brad planned to use against my family. Standing in that doorway, watching my son-in-law toast his own cleverness while my daughters scrubbed dishes 10 feet away, I made a decision that would reshape all of our futures. Brad thought he was playing chess with someone too trusting to see the board. He was about to discover that building a 40-year real estate development career required understanding leverage, contracts, and human nature at levels his sales training had never approached. The game was about to change, and the old man he'd dismissed so casually was holding all the pieces that mattered. The drive home from Maple Ridge that night felt longer than usual, Portland streetlights blurring past, while Dorothy sat rigid in the passenger seat. Neither of us spoke until we'd pulled into our driveway on Hillsdale, the modest ranch house we'd called home for 4 decades, suddenly feeling like a command center for a war I hadn't wanted, but would absolutely finish. Inside, Dorothy made coffee despite the late hour. Her hands moved with the automatic precision of someone performing familiar tasks while their mind worked through impossible problems. I sat at our kitchen table, the same oak surface where we'd helped Emily with homework, celebrated her college acceptance, planned her wedding 8 years ago to a man I'd believed was decent enough to deserve my daughter. "We need to call Vincent first thing tomorrow morning." Dorothy set a mug in front of me, steam rising between us like the anger neither of us could fully express yet.
"And we need documentation of everything Brad's been planning. Every text message, every valuation report, every conversation you overheard." I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder app I'd started using during the drive home. After finding that folder in Brad's office, I'd quietly activated the recording feature before returning to the living room. The audio quality wasn't perfect through the kitchen window, but Brad's words came through with damning clarity. I played it for Dorothy, watching her face harden with each arrogant syllable about the old man, and Emily quitting her teaching job and living the way he deserved. That narcissistic piece of work? Dorothy's language rarely turned harsh, her nursing background having given her professional patience with difficult people. But this was her daughter, her grandchildren, her family under threat from someone who'd sat at this very table countless times, accepting our hospitality while plotting betrayal. What's our first move? I'd spent the entire drive home considering that exact question. Brad thought he had 2 more years to play his game, unaware that I now knew every card he was holding. The occupancy agreement gave me legal authority to terminate their residence with 60 days' notice for any violation of terms. But evicting Emily and the grandchildren felt like using a sledgehammer when surgical precision was required. No, I needed something that would expose Brad's character while protecting Emily from the worst of the fallout. Vincent Chen's office occupied the third floor of a converted warehouse in Portland's Pearl District, the kind of space that telegraphs success without ostentation. I'd known Vincent since 1985, when we'd both been hungry young professionals trying to establish ourselves in Oregon's competitive real estate market. He'd handled every significant property transaction I'd ever made, including the Maple Ridge purchase 3 years ago. More importantly, he understood family dynamics and the emotional complexity that came with mixing money and relationships. "Harold, Dorothy," Vincent greeted us Friday morning with the concerned expression of someone who'd received my cryptic phone call requesting an emergency meeting. His corner office overlooked the Willamette River, autumn sun reflecting off the water in patterns that would have been calming under different circumstances. "Tell me what's happening." I laid out everything systematically: the overheard conversation revealing Brad's affair with Jessica, a folder of documents showing months of planning to secure the house before divorcing Emily, the recorded audio of Brad discussing timeline strategies and his disdain for my daughter's teaching career, the refinancing applications with his name as primary borrower, despite having no legal ownership he's trying to leverage. "Can we use that?"
I leaned forward, seeing the first tactical opening. File charges for attempted fraud? Vincent shook his head slowly. Attempted fraud requires proving intent to deceive a financial institution. These applications haven't been submitted yet. They're just prepared documents. We could report it, but prosecutors rarely pursue cases where no actual harm occurred. However, his hand moved to a different folder. These documents prove his character and intentions. That becomes valuable in divorce proceedings if Emily chooses that path. When she chooses that path, Dorothy corrected firmly. Once she knows about Jessica and the rest of Brad's planning, there's no salvaging that marriage. The question is how we manage the revelation to minimize Emily's trauma while maximizing legal advantage. Vincent's clinical approach to family crisis had always been simultaneously helpful and unsettling. If you confront Brad directly, he'll lawyer up immediately and start damage control. If you tell Emily first, she might confront him emotionally before securing her own legal position. I'd been considering a third option, something that would force Brad's hand while giving Emily time to process reality with support structures in place. What if we initiated a property assessment under the guise of estate planning? Bring in appraisers, review the occupancy agreement terms, maybe hint at potential changes to the arrangement. Watch how Brad reacts when he thinks his timeline might be disrupted. Vincent's expression shifted to something resembling appreciation. You want to apply pressure and observe his behavior, see if he reveals more about his plans or makes mistakes trying to secure his position. Exactly. And while we're doing that, we quietly gather more evidence. Phone records showing his contact patterns with Jessica, financial documents proving he's been positioning himself for divorce. Anything that helps Emily understand this wasn't a sudden decision, but a calculated betrayal. Patricia Gomez had been Vincent's go-to private investigator for 15 years, handling everything from corporate due diligence to personal matters requiring discretion. Her office shared the third floor of Vincent's building, a convenient arrangement that facilitated collaboration on cases requiring both legal expertise and investigative work. She was in her mid-50s, a former Portland police detective who transitioned to private practice after getting tired of bureaucratic limitations on her methods. You want surveillance on Brad Parker and documentation of his relationship with Jessica Hartwell. Patricia stated objectives rather than asking questions, her decades of investigative work having taught her to cut through emotional context and focus on actionable intelligence. What's the timeline? As fast as possible without compromising quality. I wanted comprehensive documentation, but also felt urgency about protecting Emily from extended exposure to Brad's deception. Every dinner she cooked for him, every night she spent believing her marriage was intact, felt like another layer of betrayal I was allowing to continue. Patricia made notes on a legal pad with efficient shorthand. Next Tech Solutions' downtown office makes surveillance straightforward. Public spaces, multiple vantage points. Easy to document who he meets for lunch or drinks after work. The challenge will be confirming the affair definitively, rather than just suspicious proximity. The text messages in his folder mention meeting Jessica at her apartment in the South Waterfront District. Dorothy had been studying the printouts I'd photographed with my phone. There were references to her building's parking garage and discussions about being careful with office elevator cameras. That gives me workable locations. Patricia's expression suggested she'd handled dozens of similar cases and found them tediously predictable. Men having affairs follow remarkably consistent patterns. They think they're being clever, but they repeat the same mistakes. Give me 1 week and I'll have photo documentation, timeline analysis, and probably enough evidence to establish grounds for divorce with fault. The word divorce hung in the air like something solid and final. Dorothy reached over and squeezed my hand, her touch anchoring me to the reality that we were dismantling our daughter's marriage, even though Brad had done the actual destroying months ago. We were just revealing what already existed beneath the surface performance of family normalcy. I want Emily protected through this process. My voice came out rougher than intended. Whatever evidence you gather, I need it presented in a way that shows her the truth without making her feel humiliated or foolish for not seeing it sooner. Patricia's expression softened slightly. Mr. Mitchell, I've been doing this work long enough to know that spouses often sense something is wrong, but can't quite identify what. Your daughter probably has doubts she's been suppressing because confronting them feels too overwhelming. What we're doing is giving her permission to trust her instincts and take action. The weekend passed with excruciating slowness. Saturday morning, I drove past the Maple Ridge house, ostensibly heading to the hardware store, but really just needing to see the physical structure that had become the center of this crisis. The craftsman architecture looked serene in the autumn light, leaves scattered across the lawn that Brad was supposed to maintain, but usually neglected until Emily nagged him about neighborhood standards. Sophie's bicycle leaned against the front porch. Lucas's soccer ball sat abandoned near the driveway. Evidence of innocent childhood happening inside walls that Brad's calculated betrayal contained. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Thanks again for dinner, Dad. The kids loved seeing you and Mom. Brad's been stressed about work lately, so the family time really helped his mood." I stared at that message for a long moment, hating that my daughter was making excuses for her husband's stress while he was planning to divorce her and take the house I'd provided. The urge to call her immediately and expose everything battled against the strategic patience Vincent had counseled. Evidence first, revelation second, protection always. Sunday afternoon brought another family obligation, this time at Dorothy's sister's house in Beaverton for a birthday celebration. Extended family gatherings usually felt comfortable, but this one carried an undercurrent of tension as Dorothy and I navigated questions about Emily and Brad with carefully neutral responses. Yes, they're doing well, the kids are growing so fast, Brad's busy with work, all technically true statements that concealed the rotting foundation beneath surface pleasantries. Dorothy's sister Karen cornered me near the dessert table with the directness of someone who'd known me for 40 years. "Something's wrong. I can see it in how you and Dot keep looking at each other like you're having a conversation nobody else can hear. Is it Emily?" I wanted to tell her everything, to share the burden of knowledge with someone who loved Emily almost as much as we did. But operational security meant limiting who knew what until we'd secured all necessary evidence and prepared Emily for the revelation. "Just some family stuff we're working through, nothing we can't handle." Karen studied my face with the skepticism of someone who'd watched 3 daughters through their own relationship dramas. "Harold, I've watched you navigate construction deals and business crises for decades. You're a problem solver. But family situations require different tools than real estate transactions. Whatever's happening, make sure you're prioritizing Emily's emotional well-being over winning some strategic victory." Her words hit harder than intended because they touched the fear I'd been suppressing since Thursday night. Was I approaching this like a business problem when it required a father's heart? But then I thought about Brad's smug voice, discussing Emily quitting her teaching job like her career was an inconvenience to his upgraded lifestyle. I thought about Jessica laughing in my daughter's bedroom while planning their future in my investment property. Sometimes love required strategic victory to create space for healing. Monday morning arrived with rain that matched my mood. Gray skies over Portland that felt appropriate for the week ahead. Patricia had already sent her first surveillance report. Brad Parker departed his residence at 7:15 a.m., drove to Next Tech Solutions' downtown office, entered the building at 7:40. Standard commute pattern. Subject observed having coffee in building lobby with female matching description of Jessica Hartwell at 8:30. Physical proximity and body language suggest intimate relationship beyond professional colleagues. The report included photos taken from across the lobby through the building's glass walls. Brad leaning close to Jessica, his hand resting on her lower back in a gesture of casual possession. Jessica laughing at something he'd said, her face turned up toward his with obvious attraction. Two people who believed themselves unseen, acting out their affair in semi-public spaces because the thrill of deception had become part of the attraction. I forwarded the report to Vincent with a brief message. This is just the beginning. Let's see what else surfaces this week. Tuesday morning brought the property assessment I'd arranged through Vincent's network of real estate professionals. Marcus Webb, a certified appraiser I'd worked with on commercial projects for 20 years, arrived at the Maple Ridge house at 9 o'clock sharp with his equipment and professional demeanor that suggested routine business rather than tactical maneuvering. Emily had been notified the previous evening about the assessment, my call framed as standard estate planning review that required updated valuations on all family properties. She'd accepted the explanation without suspicion, mentioning that Brad was traveling to Seattle for client meetings and wouldn't be home until Wednesday evening. The timing was intentional. I wanted Marcus's assessment completed and Brad's reaction observed when he returned to find evidence that the property landscape was shifting. Marcus spent 3 hours measuring rooms, photographing features, reviewing comparable sales data, and documenting the home's condition with meticulous detail. Emily had taken a personal day from Riverside Elementary to be present, her teacher's instinct making her uncomfortable with strangers accessing her home unsupervised. She made coffee and answered Marcus's questions about renovations and maintenance with the pride of someone who genuinely loved the space, unaware that her answers were being documented as part of a larger strategy. Your father made an excellent investment with this property, Marcus told Emily as he packed up his equipment. The Lake Oswego market has appreciated significantly since 2022. Current valuation would put this home around $940,000, possibly higher, depending on final comparable analysis. I watched Emily's face process that number, seeing the flicker of calculation behind her eyes. She knew what her teaching salary was, knew what Brad claimed to earn, understood that they could never afford to purchase this home at current market rates. The security she'd felt living here was entirely dependent on my continued generosity, a fact Brad had been exploiting while planning to convert that generosity into his personal asset. Dad's always been incredibly generous. Emily walked Marcus to the door, her voice carrying genuine gratitude mixed with something that might have been emerging awareness. I don't know how we'd ever repay him for this opportunity. After Marcus left, Emily and I sat in her kitchen, the same space where I'd overheard Brad's phone conversation 5 days earlier. She poured fresh coffee with the automatic hospitality she'd learned from Dorothy, but her movements carried tension that hadn't been there before the assessment. "Is everything okay, Dad?" The direct question arrived sooner than I'd expected. "You've never done a property assessment before, and Mom's been acting strange lately, like she's worried about something but won't say what." This was the moment I'd been dreading and planning for simultaneously. Tell her nothing and maintain operational security, or reveal enough truth to prepare her for what was coming. I chose a middle path that felt like walking a tightrope over consequences I couldn't fully predict. I'm reviewing all our assets as part of updating the estate plan. Standard practice for someone my age, making sure everything's properly structured for when Dorothy and I are gone. The assessment helps establish current values for tax purposes and inheritance planning. The explanation was technically accurate while omitting the actual motivation. Emily nodded slowly, accepting the surface logic, but clearly sensing deeper currents she couldn't identify. Her psychology training from college, though years dormant beneath teaching responsibilities and motherhood, was starting to activate the pattern recognition that made good therapists effective. Does this have anything to do with Brad? Her question landed with unexpected precision. He's been acting different lately, more secretive with his phone, staying late at work more often, getting defensive when I ask basic questions about his day. I keep telling myself it's just stress from the new sales targets at Nextech, but something feels off. The opening was there, a clear path to revealing everything I knew. But Vincent's advice echoed in my mind about securing evidence first and ensuring Emily had legal protection before emotional revelations created chaos. I wanted to tell her about Jessica, about the refinancing applications, about Brad's plan to divorce her once he secured the house. Instead, I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. If something feels off, trust that instinct. Your intuition about people has always been sharp, even when you were little. Remember how you knew your second-grade teacher, Mrs. Henderson, was going through something difficult before any of the other students noticed? Emily smiled slightly at the memory. She was getting divorced. I could tell from how sad she looked when she thought we weren't watching. I made her a card that said, "Teachers deserve to be happy too." You've always had a good heart and clear eyes. Don't let anyone convince you to ignore what you're seeing just because acknowledging it feels uncomfortable. We talked for another hour about neutral topics. Sophie's upcoming school play, Lucas's obsession with dinosaurs, Emily's frustration with standardized testing requirements that were undermining actual education. But underneath the ordinary conversation, I could see her mind working through the implications of my visit, the property assessment, the vague warning about trusting her instincts. Seeds planted that would either grow into protective awareness or get trampled by Brad's manipulation, depending on how the next few days unfolded.
Patricia's surveillance report arrived Tuesday evening with documentation that removed any remaining doubt about Brad's affair. Subject departed Next Tech Solutions at 5:30 p.m., drove directly to South Waterfront District, entered parking garage of Cosmopolitan Towers at 5:50. Subject observed entering building with Jessica Hartwell, both individuals using resident keycard access. Subject did not exit building until 7:40 a.m. Wednesday morning. The attached photos showed Brad and Jessica entering the building together, his overnight bag visible in one clear shot. More photos documented his departure the following morning, wearing the same clothes from the previous evening, Jessica visible in her apartment window watching him leave. The timeline matched perfectly with his supposed Seattle business trip. He'd told Emily he was meeting clients 2 hours north when he'd actually been 15 minutes away sleeping with his coworker. I forwarded everything to Vincent with a message that probably revealed more anger than strategic thinking. He's not even trying to hide it anymore. How long until we have enough for Emily to file with clear fault grounds? Vincent's response came within minutes. We have enough now. The question is whether you want to tell Emily directly or let her discover it through other means. Sometimes finding evidence themselves gives people agency in a situation where they feel powerless. The suggestion had merit, but felt cruel. Imagining Emily stumbling across proof of Brad's betrayal without support or preparation. Yet Vincent understood human psychology in ways my construction background hadn't taught me. People who discovered their own evidence owned their decisions differently than those who had truth delivered by well-meaning relatives. Wednesday afternoon brought an unexpected development that shifted the entire tactical landscape. Emily called my cell phone at 2:15, her voice carrying a brittle quality I recognized from when she'd called to tell us about her first serious boyfriend's infidelity back in college. "Dad, I need to talk to you and Mom.
can you come over tonight after the kids are in bed? Brad's still in Seattle, supposedly, so we can talk privately." The supposedly carried weight that suggested her instincts had sharpened considerably since our kitchen conversation yesterday. Dorothy and I arrived at Maple Ridge at 8:30, finding Emily waiting with the rigid composure of someone holding themselves together through force of will. She'd been crying recently, evidence visible in red-rimmed eyes and the tissue box positioned within easy reach on the coffee table. "Brad's not in Seattle." Emily's first words eliminated any need for careful revelation strategies. "I called the hotel where he said he was staying to leave a message about Sophie's school play schedule. The front desk had no reservation under his name, so I checked our credit card statements online and found charges from restaurants here in Portland, including one last night at a South Waterfront wine bar I've never been to." Dorothy moved immediately to sit beside Emily on the couch, maternal instinct overriding the careful distance I'd been maintaining. "Oh, sweetheart." "There's more." Emily pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "I called Brad's office this morning, pretending I needed to reach him urgently about Lucas being sick. His assistant, Jessica, said Brad had called in working remotely today, and she didn't expect him in the office. But his calendar that syncs to our home computer shows he blocked today for Seattle client meetings." The name Jessica hung in the air like confirmation of suspicions Emily had probably been suppressing for weeks or months. I watched my daughter's face as she processed the connections she'd been avoiding, seeing the moment when denial became impossible and grief became inevitable. "I think my husband is having an affair." Emily's voice broke on the last word. "And I think it's with his assistant. And I think I've known something was wrong for a while, but kept telling myself I was being paranoid or insecure or reading too much into innocent explanations." Dorothy wrapped Emily in the kind of hug that mothers give daughters when words can't fix what's broken. I sat across from them, feeling the weight of knowledge I'd been carrying for 6 days, wanting to rage against Brad's cruelty while knowing Emily needed support more than she needed my anger. "I have something to show you." The folder I'd brought contained copies of everything Patricia had documented, everything I'd found in Brad's office, everything that proved this wasn't paranoia but validated reality. But before I share this, I need you to understand that none of this is your fault. Brad made choices that have nothing to do with your worth or your marriage efforts. Emily pulled back from Dorothy's embrace, wiping her eyes with fierce determination. "Show me everything. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." I laid out the evidence systematically. The surveillance photos of Brad entering Jessica's building and not leaving until morning, the text message printouts from his office discussing their affair timeline, the refinancing applications showing his plan to claim ownership of the house, the asset division worksheets calculating how he'd profit from divorcing her after securing the property, and finally, the audio recording of Brad discussing the old man and Emily quitting her teaching job and living the way he deserved. Emily listened to that recording 3 times, her expression moving through disbelief, betrayal, fury, and finally cold resolve. "He was planning to steal your house and divorce me?" Her voice had gone flat with the emotional overload that precedes either breakdown or breakthrough. "How long have you known?" "Since last Thursday." I kept my own voice steady, knowing she needed strength to mirror right now. "I overheard him on the phone and started gathering evidence immediately. I wanted you to have complete information before making any decisions about your marriage or your future." "You've known for almost a week and didn't tell me?" There was hurt beneath the accusation, the sting of protection that felt like exclusion. Dorothy intervened before I could defend my choices. "Your father was trying to spare you pain while building a case that would protect you legally and financially. But Emily, you need to hear this clearly. You have every right to be angry at Brad, and you're also allowed to be frustrated that we kept this from you, even with good intentions." Emily looked between us, processing layers of betrayal from her husband and complicated protection from her parents. Then she stood up, and walked to the window overlooking the backyard Brad had promised to landscape but never touched. When she turned back, her face carried the determination of someone who'd found bedrock beneath shifting ground. "I want him out of this house." Her voice was steel, wrapped in teacher authority. "I don't care about the legal complexity or the property ownership or any of it. I want Brad Parker gone from my life and my children's daily reality as fast as possible. Vincent can file emergency custody motions and begin divorce proceedings immediately." I had already discussed the legal pathway with our attorney. Given Brad's deception and the evidence of his affair, we can pursue fault-based divorce, which affects asset division and custody arrangements. Do it.
Emily's eyes were dry now, tears replaced by clarity. "And Dad, about this house. I know it's yours legally, and you have every right to sell it or evict us or do whatever you need to do. Sophie and Lucas and I can move in with you and Mom temporarily while I figure out next steps." The offer was genuine. My daughter's pride taking secondary position to practical need and family support. But I'd spent 6 days considering exactly this scenario, and had reached a different conclusion about the Maple Ridge property and its role in Emily's future. "We're not selling the house." My words carried the finality of decisions made and commitments honored. "But we are removing the person who tried to steal it." Thursday morning arrived with the kind of autumn clarity that made Portland beautiful. Sunlight cutting through dissipating fog, as if the weather itself was cooperating with the need for truth to emerge from obscurity. Brad's return from his fictional Seattle trip was scheduled for noon, giving us a narrow window to prepare the confrontation that would dismantle his carefully constructed deceptions. Vincent had worked through the night drafting emergency motions that would be filed with Multnomah County Family Court by end of business day. Temporary restraining order preventing Brad from accessing or claiming any interest in the Maple Ridge property. Emergency custody arrangement granting Emily primary physical custody of Sophie and Lucas pending full hearing. Immediate financial disclosure requirements compelling Brad to reveal all accounts, assets, and debts. The legal machinery was positioned and ready to activate the moment Brad walked through that door. Emily had called in sick to Riverside Elementary, her principal expressing concern about the stress evident in her voice. The kids were at Dorothy's house, my wife having picked them up early that morning with promises of baking cookies and watching their favorite movies. Sophie had been excited about the unexpected grandmother day. Lucas had asked why Mommy sounded sad. Dorothy had deflected with the skill of someone who'd spent 40 years protecting her daughter from various hurts, while knowing some pain was unavoidable and necessary for growth. Robert Torres arrived at 10:30, the family mediator Vincent had recommended for situations requiring professional facilitation of difficult conversations. Robert had 20 years' experience navigating high-conflict divorces, his calm demeanor and clinical training making him effective at keeping confrontations from escalating into physical altercations or complete communication breakdowns. "Mrs. Parker, I want to establish some ground rules before your husband arrives." Robert sat across from Emily in the living room, his presence adding weight to what was about to unfold. "You're going to hear things that hurt. Your instinct might be to defend yourself, to argue, to demand explanations. But our goal today is information transfer and boundary establishment, not resolution or reconciliation." Emily nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She'd changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on jeans and a sweater that suggested casual confidence rather than the vulnerable wife Brad expected to manipulate. Her eyes held the reddened evidence of intermittent crying, mixed with the steel determination of someone who'd moved past denial into action phase. "I don't want him to explain or apologize." Emily's voice carried surprising steadiness. "I want him to know that I know everything. I want him to understand he's lost access to this house and our children's daily lives, and I want him gone today." "That's reasonable and achievable." Robert made notes on his tablet.
Your father and Vincent will handle the legal explanations. My role is to ensure everyone stays physically safe and emotionally regulated enough to complete necessary logistics. Brad's BMW pulled into the driveway at 11:50, his timing predictable as always. Through the front window, I watched him gather his overnight bag from the trunk, check his phone, and walk toward the house with the casual confidence of someone who believed his deceptions remained secure. He'd probably been texting Jessica during the drive, making plans for their next encounter, calculating how many more months until the house became his leverage for the lifestyle upgrade he felt he deserved. The front door opened, and Brad's cheerful greeting died when he saw the assembled group in his living room. Emily, seated between Robert and myself, Vincent standing near the fireplace with his leather portfolio. The formal arrangement that signaled this was no ordinary homecoming. "What's going on?" Brad's lawyer instincts activated immediately, his expression shifting from confusion to guarded caution. "Emily, who are these people? Why is your father here in the middle of a weekday?" "Sit down, Brad." Emily's voice held authority she'd developed managing 27 second graders through daily chaos and conflict. "We need to discuss some things about our marriage and this house and your relationship with Jessica Hartwell." The color drained from Brad's face with satisfying speed. His eyes darted between the assembled group, calculating exposure and damage control. The sales manager persona crumbling to reveal something smaller and more desperate underneath. "I don't know what you think you know, but I can explain everything." The default defensive position of someone caught in lies they haven't yet identified. "Jessica is a coworker. We've had some business dinners. There's nothing inappropriate happening." Vincent stepped forward with the measured movement of someone presenting evidence in depositions. "Mr. Parker, I'm Vincent Chen, Mrs. Parker's legal representation as of this morning. We have photographic documentation of you entering Jessica Hartwell's residence Tuesday evening at 5:50 p.m. and not departing until 7:40 Wednesday morning. We have credit card statements showing charges at South Waterfront establishments during time periods you claim to be in Seattle. We have text message records discussing your affair timeline and plans to secure ownership of this house before filing for divorce." Brad's mouth opened and closed without sound, the precision of Vincent's recitation eliminating any wiggle room for alternative explanations. His gaze fixed on Emily with something between appeal and accusation, as if her discovery of his betrayal was somehow worse than the betrayal itself. "Emily, come on, we can talk about this privately. Whatever your father thinks he knows, there's context he's missing." Brad's voice carried practiced reasonableness, the tone he probably used to close reluctant sales prospects. "Let's send everyone home and discuss this like adults." "We are discussing it like adults." Emily's composure held firm, though I could see the effort it required. Adults who gather evidence before making accusations. Adults who consult lawyers before confronting liars. Adults who protect their children from unstable situations created by selfish choices. I played the audio recording then, Brad's own voice filling the room with damning clarity. "Once the old man transfers the deed like we plan, this place is ours, free and clear. Then Emily can quit that teaching job and we'll finally live the way we're supposed to, the way I deserve." Brad's face shifted through multiple expressions as he listened to himself. Recognition, followed by panic, followed by anger at being recorded. "That was a private conversation. You can't just record people without consent. Oregon is a two-party consent state."
Vincent's slight smile suggested he'd anticipated this exact objection. "Oregon requires two-party consent for recording private conversations where there's a reasonable expectation of privacy. However, Mr. Parker, you were standing on property owned by Mr. Mitchell, speaking loudly enough to be overheard from common areas. No reasonable expectation of privacy exists under those circumstances. The recording is admissible." The legal technicality landed with visible impact. Brad slumped slightly, his confident posture deflating as he realized the conspiracy he'd constructed so carefully was now documented evidence that would destroy rather than enrich him. "Look, I made mistakes.
Brad shifted tactics toward contrition, the sales technique of acknowledging fault to rebuild credibility. Jessica and I got too close. The stress at work, the pressure of living in a house I couldn't afford on my own, feeling like everything was handed to me instead of earned. I'm not making excuses, I'm just trying to explain how things got complicated. You were planning to steal my father's house and divorce me. Emily's voice cut through his explanation with sharp clarity. Those aren't complications, Brad. That's calculated betrayal executed over months while I cooked your meals and raised your children and believed we were building a life together. Robert intervened before Brad could respond, his mediator training recognizing the conversation was approaching emotional overflow. Mr. Parker, explanations and justifications aren't productive right now. What we need from you is practical cooperation with immediate next steps. Do you understand that your marriage is ending and your residence in this home is terminated effective today? Brad's eyes widened with genuine shock. Today? You can't kick me out today. I have rights as a tenant. You need to go through formal eviction procedures. Vincent pulled documents from his portfolio with bureaucratic efficiency. You're not a tenant, Mr. Parker. You're an occupant under a revocable license granted by the property owner, Mr. Mitchell. That license is hereby revoked due to violation of terms, specifically your attempt to fraudulently claim ownership and your documented plans to harm the owner's family interests. You have no legal right to remain on this property. The reality was settling over Brad like concrete hardening around his options. His affair exposed, his property schemes documented, his marriage dissolved, his housing eliminated, all within the span of 30 minutes. He looked at Emily with something that might have been genuine desperation beneath the layers of narcissistic calculation. Em, we've been together 8 years. We have 2 children. You're really going to throw away our entire family over some mistakes I can fix? You threw away our family when you decided Jessica and this house were more important than our marriage vows. Emily stood up, physically claiming space and authority. I'm not the one who broke promises. I'm just the one refusing to pretend I didn't notice. Brad turned to me then, his expression shifting to appeal. Harold, come on, you're a reasonable man. You know marriages go through rough patches. Don't let one bad recording destroy your grandchildren's family structure. We can work this out if Emily would just calm down and think rationally. The attempt to position Emily's justified anger as irrational female emotion was a tactical mistake that revealed Brad's core disrespect more clearly than any affair evidence. I stood slowly, feeling my 68 years and 40-year construction career settling into a posture that had intimidated uncooperative subcontractors and dishonest suppliers throughout decades of business dealings. My daughter is thinking rationally, which is why she's ending a marriage to someone who never respected her enough to be faithful or honest. I kept my voice level, despite wanting to express considerably less professional sentiments. You have 2 hours to pack essential belongings. Anything remaining will be inventoried and made available for pickup under supervised conditions next week. This is insane. Brad's voice climbed toward desperation. You're all acting like I committed some crime. People have affairs. Marriages survive infidelity. This scorched earth approach is going to hurt Sophie and Lucas more than it hurts me. Robert stepped in with clinical precision. Mr. Parker, research consistently shows that children suffer more from ongoing parental conflict than from clean separation. Your children will adjust to new custody arrangements considerably better than they'd adjust to watching their mother stay with someone who betrayed her trust. Vincent added the legal weight that eliminated Brad's remaining maneuvering room. Emergency custody hearing is scheduled for Monday morning. Given the evidence of deception and financial planning that prioritized your interests over your children's stability, I'm confident the court will grant Mrs. Parker primary physical custody. You'll have supervised visitation initially, expanding to standard arrangements once you've demonstrated stable housing and appropriate boundaries. The comprehensive dismantling of Brad's life was happening faster than he could process. I almost felt something resembling pity watching him realize that every contingency he'd planned for securing the house had failed, and now he was losing not just the property, but access to his children and any moral high ground he might have claimed as, "Where am I supposed to go?" Brad's question carried the bewilderment of someone who'd always had safety nets and was discovering they'd been removed. "That's not our concern." Emily's voice held no sympathy. "You've been sleeping at Jessica's apartment regularly according to surveillance reports. I'm sure she'll accommodate her boyfriend now that he's available full-time." Brad flinched at the word boyfriend, perhaps recognizing that Jessica's interest might evaporate once he couldn't offer the lifestyle upgrade represented by the Maple Ridge house. Affairs built on fantasy rarely survived contact with reality's financial and social complications. Vincent handed Brad a folder containing copies of all filed motions, custody arrangements, and property notifications. "You're required to appear at Monday's hearing. Failure to appear will result in default judgment on all matters. You're also prohibited from contacting Mrs. Parker except through legal representatives or the court-approved communication app for co-parenting." Brad's eyes widened with genuine shock.
Emily remained motionless until Brad's footsteps faded upstairs. Then she collapsed into Dorothy's arms with the kind of deep sobbing that comes when adrenaline finally stops masking grief. Robert quietly excused himself to monitor Brad's packing, ensuring nothing was taken beyond personal items. Vincent made phone calls coordinating locksmith services to change all entry codes and keys before evening. I stood watching my daughter process the destruction of her marriage and felt the complex mixture of satisfaction at protecting her and sorrow that protection had been necessary. Brad descended the stairs 40 minutes later with 2 suitcases and a backpack, his face carefully blank. He paused at the door as if searching for final words that might change the trajectory, found nothing adequate, and left without speaking. The sound of his car pulling away felt like pressure releasing from a sealed container. Emily lifted her head from Dorothy's shoulder, her face wet but her eyes clear. "Thank you for believing me." Her words were directed at all of us, but carried particular weight toward me. "Thank you for gathering evidence instead of just telling me I was imagining things. Thank you for making this possible. You did the hard part." I sat beside her, taking her hand. "You trusted your instincts and chose truth over comfortable delusion. That takes more courage than anything we contributed." "What happens now?" Emily's question acknowledged that removing Brad was only the first step in rebuilding her life. "Now we make sure you and the kids are secure, legally protected, and supported while you figure out what comes next." Vincent's practical focus provided anchor points. Monday's hearing establishes custody and support. Within 30 days, we'll have preliminary divorce proceedings. Within 6 months, you'll be legally free to build whatever life you choose. Emily looked around the living room of the house that had become both prison and prize in Brad's calculations. "And this house, do I stay here or find something smaller I can afford on my teacher salary?" That decision was yours the moment Brad tried to steal it. My answer carried the weight of choices I'd made during sleepless nights over the past week. This house was meant to give you and the kids stability. Brad's betrayal doesn't change that intention. You stay here as long as you want, and when you're ready, we'll discuss transfer arrangements that make sense for your situation. "Dad, I can't let you keep paying for everything while I figure out my life." Emily's pride surfaced through exhaustion and grief. "You're not letting me do anything." Dorothy's voice carried maternal authority that trumped adult independence. "We're choosing to support our daughter through a crisis created by someone else's selfishness. Accept the help with grace and pay it forward when Sophie or Lucas needs you decades from now." The practical logistics consumed the rest of Thursday. Locksmith changing entry codes, Vincent filing final motions with family court, Patricia providing complete surveillance documentation for divorce proceedings, Robert scheduling follow-up sessions to help Emily process trauma and rebuild confidence. The machinery of family protection operating with efficient coordination.
Friday morning brought unexpected solidarity from Emily's professional community. Her principal arrived with a care package from the teaching staff, meals and gift cards, and offers of childcare from colleagues who'd heard vague mentions of family crisis. The second grade team sent flowers with a card signed by all her students, crayon drawings expressing love in the unself-conscious way of 7-year-olds who didn't understand adult complications but recognized their teacher needed support. By Friday evening, Emily's social media had been scrubbed of Brad's presence, wedding photos archived rather than deleted for the kids' eventual questions, relationship status changed to single with the finality of someone closing chapters. Jessica had apparently been informed of the situation because Patricia reported Brad moving his remaining possessions from the South Waterfront apartment to a budget extended stay hotel near the airport, the romantic hideaway losing its appeal once it became permanent residence. The weekend brought Sophie and Lucas home to explanations carefully calibrated for their age and understanding. Daddy made choices that hurt Mommy's feelings, so they needed time apart to figure things out. The kids would still see Daddy regularly, but he'd be living somewhere else for now. Sophie cried and asked questions that had no good answers. Lucas seemed confused but accepted the new normal with the resilience children often demonstrate when adults maintain consistent routines around shifting circumstances. Monday's custody hearing lasted 90 minutes, Brad appearing with a court-appointed lawyer who had insufficient time to mount effective defense against Vincent's comprehensive documentation. Judge Maria Castellanos reviewed evidence with the weary efficiency of someone who'd presided over too many similar cases, then granted Emily primary physical custody, with Brad receiving supervised visits pending evaluation. The gavel fell, and Emily exhaled tension she'd been carrying for 10 days. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Brad attempted to approach her, but Robert intervened with professional courtesy that masked steel boundaries. "All communication goes through the approved app, Mr. Parker. You know the terms." Brad looked at Emily one last time, perhaps searching for the woman who'd once loved him enough to build a life together, finding instead someone who'd chosen self-respect over comfortable fiction. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the marble corridor like the sound of consequences finally arriving after years of running ahead of accountability. 6 months passed with the steady rhythm of healing that comes from choosing truth over comfortable lies. Spring arrived in Portland with cherry blossoms, transforming the city into something hopeful, and Emily stood in the kitchen of the Maple Ridge house, making breakfast for Sophie and Lucas with a lightness that had been absent during the final years of her marriage to Brad. The divorce finalized in March with terms that reflected Brad's complete failure to claim any interest in property he'd never owned. Vincent's documentation had been so thorough that Brad's attorney advised settling rather than pursuing contested proceedings that would only generate legal fees without changing outcomes. Brad received standard visitation rights, no spousal support given his documented infidelity, and child support calculated from his next tech salary that had miraculously decreased once financial obligations became court-mandated. Jessica had ended their relationship within weeks of Brad's eviction, the romance apparently less compelling once it involved actual consequences rather than stolen moments in someone else's house. Brad now lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Gresham, his BMW traded for a sensible sedan that fit his reduced circumstances. He showed up for his scheduled visits with the kids, though Sophie had started asking why Daddy seemed sad all the time, and Lucas had announced he liked it better when it was just Mommy at home.
Emily returned to teaching with renewed energy, her second graders benefiting from a teacher who'd rediscovered her own strength through surviving betrayal. She'd started attending a support group for divorced parents, formed friendships with women who understood the complex grief of losing marriages while gaining freedom. Her social media slowly filled with pictures of adventures with the kids, girls' nights with teacher friends, solo hikes in the Columbia River Gorge that suggested someone learning to enjoy her own company. The house itself transformed under Emily's sole occupancy. The formal living room became a reading nook where she and the kids spent evenings with library books. Brad's unused home office converted into an art studio where Sophie's paintings covered walls alongside Lucas's dinosaur drawings. The backyard finally got attention, Emily hiring a landscaping service with money she'd saved from not financing Brad's lifestyle expectations. She planted a vegetable garden with the kids, teaching them about growth cycles and patient cultivation, lessons that applied to more than tomatoes. Dorothy and I settled into grandparent roles that felt more authentic without Brad's presence creating artificial family dynamics. Sunday dinners happened at our Hillsdale house now, Emily and the kids arriving with genuine enthusiasm rather than the performative happiness that had marked the final years of her marriage. Sophie talked about school without editing her stories. Lucas asked me to teach him how to use tools in my garage workshop. Emily laughed at Dorothy's jokes without the underlying tension of someone monitoring their spouse's reactions. Vincent called in April with news that Brad's professional situation had deteriorated further. Next Tech Solutions had terminated his employment following an internal investigation into expense account irregularities. Apparently, Brad's pattern of using company resources for personal benefit extended beyond his marriage. He'd found work at a smaller firm with reduced salary and no advancement prospects, his reputation in Portland's tech sales community damaged beyond easy repair. I felt no satisfaction hearing about Brad's continued consequences, just exhaustion at the waste of potential when someone chose shortcuts over integrity. He'd had a good job, a beautiful family, a home most people work decades to afford, and he'd destroyed it all chasing some fantasy of deserved luxury that was never real to begin with. Emily asked about the house deed in May, her question coming during one of our regular coffee meetings at a cafe near Riverside Elementary. "Dad, I need to understand what your long-term plans are for the property, not because I'm worried, but because I need to make decisions about my future based on actual information rather than assumptions." The directness was new, evidence of someone who'd learned that avoiding difficult conversations only delayed inevitable complications. I'd been expecting this discussion and had spent considerable time with Vincent structuring an arrangement that honored both Emily's need for security and my desire to see the property eventually benefit my grandchildren. "The house becomes yours legally when Sophie turns 18. I'd gold out documents Vincent had prepared, showing Emily the trust structure that protected her occupancy while ensuring long-term stability. "Until then, you live there with no rent or mortgage obligations. Property taxes and insurance remain my responsibility. Maintenance and utilities are yours to handle, which you're already doing." Emily studied the papers with careful attention, her teacher's training making her thorough about understanding details before accepting terms. "This is incredibly generous, Dad. More than generous. But what if I want to sell it before then? What if I meet someone new and want to relocate? What if staying in the house Brad tried to steal feels wrong someday?" "Then we adjust the arrangement based on your actual needs rather than theoretical situations. The trust includes provisions for sale with proceeds going to you and the kids. The goal isn't to trap you in a specific location, it's to ensure you always have security and options." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her eyes bright with emotion that looked like gratitude mixed with grief for the father figure Brad could have been but chose not to become. "You saved us, you know. Not just financially, but you showed Sophie and Lucas what men of character actually looked like. That's worth more than any house." The summer brought unexpected developments in the form of curiosity from Sophie about why Daddy didn't live with them anymore. Emily handled the conversations with age-appropriate honesty, explaining that sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt each other, and when that happens, living separately becomes healthier than pretending everything's fine. Sophie accepted the explanation with 7-year-old resilience, then asked if Grandpa Harold could teach her to build a birdhouse like he'd built their home. I spent a Saturday in August working with Sophie in my garage workshop, guiding her small hands through measurements and drilling pilot holes and sanding rough edges smooth. She chattered about school and friends and her art projects, occasionally mentioning Daddy in ways that suggested Brad was becoming a peripheral figure rather than central presence in her life. Not erased, but appropriately sized for someone who'd prioritized himself over his children's stability. Lucas asked different questions, his 5-year-old logic trying to understand why some families lived together and others didn't. Emily explained that families came in many shapes, and what mattered wasn't the structure, but the love and respect people showed each other. Lucas decided their family was him and Sophie and Mommy and Grandma Dorothy and Grandpa Harold, listing them with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who knew who showed up consistently. Brad attended his scheduled visitations with increasing irregularity by fall, cancellations blamed on work obligations or vague personal matters that suggested his post-divorce life hadn't stabilized into anything sustainable. Sophie stopped asking when Daddy was coming. Lucas forgot to pack his overnight bag for visits that didn't happen. Emily documented every missed visit and communication failure, building records that would matter if custody arrangements needed future modification. October marked 1 year since I'd overheard Brad's phone conversation and started the investigation that dismantled his conspiracy. Emily hosted a small dinner party at the Maple Ridge house, inviting Dorothy and me along with her teacher friends and some of the divorced parents from her support group. The gathering felt celebratory. People who'd survived various betrayals and emerged stronger, choosing community over isolation. I stood in the kitchen where I'd once hidden listening to Brad plot his theft, watching Emily laugh with friends in the living room where she'd confronted her husband with evidence of his affair. The house had absorbed trauma and transformed it through the simple act of Emily choosing to stay and rebuild rather than flee from painful memories. These walls held Sophie's laughter and Lucas's dinosaur roars and Emily's gradual rediscovery of joy. That mattered more than any scheme Brad had constructed. Vincent found me there, his presence at the party reflecting friendship that had sustained decades of business and personal challenges. "You did good work, Harold. Not just legally, but as a father. Emily's thriving in ways that wouldn't have been possible if you'd handled this differently." I just gathered evidence and provided support. The rest was Emily choosing courage over comfort. Vincent smiled with the wisdom of someone who'd watched countless families navigate divorce. Most people don't gather evidence. They react emotionally, make accusations without proof, create chaos that damages everyone. You played the long game because you loved your daughter more than you needed immediate satisfaction. That's rare. The evening ended with Sophie and Lucas asleep on the couch, worn out from playing with other kids who understood what it meant to have families that looked different than storybooks suggested. Emily walked Dorothy and me to the door, hugging us both with the fierce gratitude of someone who knew exactly what had been risked and protected on her behalf. I don't say it enough, but thank you for being the kind of parents who showed up when everything fell apart. Emily's voice carried the strength of someone who'd survived fire and discovered they were less fragile than they'd feared. You gave me a foundation to rebuild from. That gift matters more than I know how to express. Driving home through Portland's autumn darkness, Dorothy reached over and took my hand. Our daughter's going to be fine. Better than fine, actually. She's becoming someone who knows her own worth. She always knew her worth. I just made sure Brad couldn't convince her otherwise. The Maple Ridge house still stands solid against whatever weather comes. Its craftsman architecture sheltering a family that learned the difference between performance and authenticity. Emily teaches her students with passion earned through surviving betrayal. Sophie builds birdhouses in my workshop. Lucas asks questions about integrity and character that suggest he's learning values that matter more than property or status. Brad exists somewhere on the periphery, his absence more beneficial than his presence ever was. The man who tried to steal a house discovered that some things can't be taken, only forfeited through choices that prioritize selfish desire over earned trust. And I sleep soundly knowing that when my daughter said her husband decides now, I decided to protect what actually mattered. Not just the house, but the family it was always meant to shelter. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.